what percentage of fighter pilots in and around, military circles do you think are bought into UAPs existing?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'll tell you what, 100% of people that have had their own experiences about it.
Yeah, yeah.
I've heard from some of the staunchest critics on this topic. They think I'm embarrassing the community by having this conversation. And then they have their own experience and they're just, like, holy shit, I guess I was the guy that was wrong here. So, it's tough to say. I don't know if I can quantify it with any precision, but, in my experience, guys that are flying that radar, they are seeing these objects, and whether they've had the agency to go check it out and gain a visual, I couldn't put a number on that, but it's definitely a topic, at least within the Navy, maybe not the Air Force, that guys are smart on. They're briefing it in their flights. They're debriefing it afterwards. They're submitting reports. In some cases, I've talked to guys who are still not comfortable reporting it, either because they just don't want to put the time in, or they don't think anything's going to happen, or they don't want it to affect their career in some way. And so I still think it's underreported regardless.
It's fascinating. I think the Navy angle to all of this is extremely underrated. I think the Navy has experienced a lot of this stuff for a very long time. And one anecdote is, I did this show on this, mid-century inventor named Thomas Townsend Brown, who I'm fascinated with, because I think maybe he made some interesting updates in topological physics and the world of gravity that have not met the eye. And there's this story, actually, he's being written about by this historian, Paul Laviolette. And Townsend Brown goes to Hyman Rickover, who is the head of the nuclear navy, basically started the American nuclear navy. And Hyman Rickover says, Townsend, stop wasting your time. Like, we've already figured this stuff out.
Oh, wow. Back then, too, huh?
Yeah. So, and then there's another guy named Robert Sarbacher, who David Grush mentions as having set up UFO secrecy along with Robert J. Oppenheimer at, the Atomic Energy Commission of 1954. And Sarbacher actually worked at the Harvard Undersea Observatory.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I think there's a lot going on underwater, and I think that the Navy's got to be, have experienced this stuff for a very long time would be my guess.
Yeah, that's interesting. Underwater world is interesting. They call them USOs, or unidentified submerged objects, I believe. And, I'll just say from my experience talking to the guys on subs and whatnot, they're always very cagey, very secretive. But think about it, you don't have the type of like air traffic that you have. On our radar, we're always seeing all these different contacts, a lot of civilian air, but underwater, there's much less of that. And so if you're seeing something bizarre, it's probably a very high likelihood that it truly is bizarre versus some type of misinterpretation. And I know going back to, even, Columbus, and even before that, most likely that they were, seeing things under the water that they didn't understand what they were. And I know Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who used to run NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association, is highly interested in these underwater anomalies. I know he's working on pursuing that as a research topic.
Yeah, there's the little brother to the NRO, which is now public, so I can talk about it, but there's not much known about it, is Neuro. And it's the underwater version of the NRO. And one gets the sense that, we've probably detected a lot of these things underwater. And do you think, per what you described as the kind of the observables of what you saw at Oceana, do you think these things have their own almost like inertial reference frames? Because one of the observables is they seem to be able to break conservation of momentum, right? Like you're flying Mach, 1 or 2 or whatever, and then you stop on a dime. And it's like, that's just impossible, like with a gas propulsion fighter jet. And so, and then plasma is also coming off the craft, which can reduce, G-force, inertial drag. And so do you think they've figured something out in that realm? Obviously, we're in extremely speculative territory here. But.
Yeah, no, I think it's a natural question, though, because based off of the flight mechanics, if you have something that's going supersonic or even 0.8 Mach or so, and you immediately stop it, it's no different than just slamming into the ground, right? In fact, it's probably a faster stop than if you were to crush an aircraft into the ground. So you have to ask yourself, how is it doing that? And I don't understand a physical mechanism that would allow it to do it without having to speculate about some type of ability to, control or manipulate inertia.
Yeah. FLIR, which, you guys picked it up with FLIR, also seems to be this important kind of sensor modality. FLIR had just been installed in 2004 in the Nimitz case with David Fravor. And so it was like this new Raytheon FLIR system, and Raytheon's like, we're not in charge of what you detect. What you detect is, it's on you guys or whatever. And so I find that very interesting as well, especially given, Hal Puthoff, who actually lives in Austin out here. He's one of the deepest, on some of the scientific theories around this stuff. And I think one of the questions, average people ask, which is a fair question, is like, why aren't we drowning in high resolution photo of this stuff? And I think it's because of these blue shifts and red shifts. And so if you were actually manipulating space-time in these ways that would comport with all these observables that you're mentioning, you'd experience probably, it would be things at the ends of the electromagnetic wave spectrum, not in the RBG spectrum that we sort of see. And so it makes sense that FLIR would pick this stuff up.
Well, our systems too, they're designed for very specific purposes. And the way our systems work is that, we have one giant, propulsion system in aircraft, and they expel a lot of heat, and the rest of the aircraft kind of absorbs energy from the friction of the air and things of that nature. And so the system is calibrated because that's the expectation, what you're going to see. And so you can break out rivets on a jet. You can see the cockpit. And you can very clearly see, the flames in the exhaust, if you will. But if you had something that was propulsing itself in an entirely different mechanism that was putting energy out equally across the skin of its body, it might just look like a blur, just a blur essentially, because it's we're kind of getting the worst part of the image, and that's what's being that's the type of energy that's putting out across the entire surface of the object. And so the FLIR, although it might be effective for detecting that there's energy coming from there, it's essentially masking itself so that we can't see. And it might not be doing that intentionally. It could be a byproduct of propulsion, or it could just be a clever masking system.
It's fascinating. One of the things that always stood out to me about the Fravor testimony was he would say it almost felt like the craft detected him, like knew that, he was sort of looking at it. And is that something that comports with any of what your squadron saw?
No, it doesn't. Not in my experience. Well, I've heard some stories after the fact, but, they would be doing their own thing. They'd be in the area. So it seemed like they were focused there, but they weren't like, if we showed up, they weren't like coming over to us or going away. They just continued to do their own thing. So we certainly didn't have that type of experience. But, I have heard, multiple cases of these maneuvering around aircraft up in Pax Rivers. Fascinating case with one of my good friends who had basically a sphere pull up about 15 feet from his cockpit while he's, maneuvering pretty quickly and hang out there for about 20 seconds and then dart off in front of him. There's another incident down in New Orleans where an object with the same description shot past the cockpit. Initially thought it was a balloon until his wingman noticed that it turned and chased the jet and basically shot up in front of it and overtook it. So I think they definitely have the capability to maneuver around us, to detect us, know we're there. But my personal experience at the time wasn't to expect these to be reacting to us in the way that they were with Fravor's case.
So you testify before Congress.
My name is Ryan Fobbs Graves, and I'm a former F-18 pilot with a decade of service in the U.S. Navy. I have experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me.
It was a historic day. It was incredible. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was lucky enough to be in the room, and we talked to each other for a bit afterwards, and it was just like, I never thought this topic would ever get that sort of airtime on that level.
Yeah.
And so how did you feel about that?
Man, I mean, just what an incredible experience and day. It was really powerful for me when I went there. I mean, I didn't know where I was going to like show up, right? So it's like I got to find the room, and we just so happened to be walking in the same direction as everyone else. And, we see the line of people, and we're like, oh, okay, well, this must be a spot. Interesting. It's cool. There's a line. And we kind of get to the front line and realize it was a corner. You take the corner and there's, another 500 people lined up on that side. And it was just, it was really powerful to just see all the support and the interest, in person instead of just kind of the random comments on Twitter or X, excuse me. But, in a sense, it's almost like almost like landing on the boat. At least it was for me, where you're just kind of locked in and trying to push away all the doubts and other thoughts that you might have, and just kind of get into the zone, be very present. Like, we mentioned earlier, I met Dave for the first time there, got to speak to his lawyer and some of the other folks out back. It was kind of, funny anecdote. We were kind of getting ready to line up to walk out, and it was like Dave Grush was standing there, and then Fravor, they both just kind of like grabbed my shoulders and pushed me to the front. You first, it's your show. Get up there.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, and I was like, here we go, And I mean, cameras clicking, and you almost feel them. It's almost like you can't even hear them in some sense. You know? I mean, it's just really powerful. But what was so fascinating, or so rewarding, I think for me was that, you see hearings on the news, and it's usually like, the members are maybe attacking the witness or whomever is testifying, or maybe it's a partisan issue and there's just a lot of back and forth on the sides of the aisle. But I've never seen a hearing that was quite like that, where it just seemed like everyone was working together, right? We were all trying to figure this out. It wasn't partisan. It wasn't adversarial. And I think it's, strange that this is an issue that's starting to bring out, at least politically, like some of the best of us, where we can have like a normal adult conversation and maybe move the ball forward. Yeah,
it was wild to see AOC and Matt Gaetz just completely simpatico, just in total agreement over this issue.
Yeah.
It's I think that this might be the only issue in which they agree on everything. So you're sitting there, and you're sitting with David Fravor and with David Grush, and you and David Fravor have these amazing kind of eyewitness accounts. And then you have David Grush sitting next to you saying that there's been a covert reverse engineering program. We've actually had a crash retrieval program for, 70 plus years around this stuff. Do you believe that? Do you think that the U.S. government is reverse engineering UFOs?
Oh, that's a tough one, in my job as a Navy pilot, I was not exposed to any type of technology like that or any type of programs like that. And so the only information that I have to go off of is the same information that basically everyone else has that's in the public sphere. I respect David Grush.
Yep.
He was tasked to do a job with the UAP task force, and that was the job, to understand and uncover this information. And he did it to the best of his ability, and he reported his findings. And so there's nothing, in his background or in his professional experience that would lead me to believe that he's lying or making it up or being facetious in any sense.
Yeah.
Now, how do I integrate that into like a wider belief system? It's tough. I think it's tough for everyone.
For everybody,
right?
Yeah.
It's one of those things, I think, that, the only satisfying resolution is to have it essentially be admitted and pulled out to some degree by the government itself.
Yeah.
And although I think people are, they have their scales of probability, and I think, he moved the needle quite a bit closer to certainty than before. And, I listened to a little bit of his story before the hearing, but, a lot of that was new information for me as well. And, it was a very surreal experience to be sitting next to someone testifying to that type of information. So yeah, I believe what he said. I believe he did it in earnest, and unless he was being manipulated, I think that the statements that he made are, the first line of attack for a representative to further understand this and hopefully uncover what's going on.